Good morning.
Oh, I see.
I'm Jennifer Hollick, and I'm with Ed Long. Oh, we can't rotate while we're live. Okay, so we're going to do it this way. We're going to try it this way. I'm Jennifer Hollick. I'm with Ed Long, and I'm at the Livingston County War Museum in Pontiac, Illinois. And Ed is going to walk us through the museum for just a moment, and then we're going to take a short break, and then I'm going to hook up the microphone to one of the World War II veterans that are here, and we'll come back on live and have some different interviews. And so, Ed, I'm going to put the camera so that it faces what's going on in the museum, so people can see. And you can kind of talk about the museum as we slowly walk through here. So we'll give you the museum.
Okay, the Livingston County War Museum actually was formed back in 2004. We've been in business now for about 11 years. All the mannequins you're viewing in here, believe it or not, come from a 35-mile circle. We have 278 on display and about 10,000 artifacts. All these were donated by local area veterans. Every uniform that's on display here, you'll notice has a tag on it. The tag will tell you the name of the person, which conflict they served in, and a little brief history of their experiences during the war and what they actually did for a job. We find this very interesting because all of these individuals in our museum, mainly due to space, we had to limit to a 35-mile circle. All these are local veterans. Some of them are highly decorated combat veterans, and they served in World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and then that's in our big room. And then when you come over to this room's Afghanistan, Iraq, and the Cold War up to present. So it represents about 130 years of military history. Literally every guy in here has his own story. And we're certainly glad you could come here and take a quick look around this morning.
I'm glad to be back. This is my second visit.
Out here in the main hall, we have some quilts hung up on the wall. Those were actually made during World War II. The red one on the right there that was first in your picture was for a pilot that was flying bombers in World War II, and the other one was for an infantryman in the Army. And the wives made those for their husbands. Behind you here, this is our Medal of Honor display. We have several Medal of Honor recipients pictured on the wall, and we have had some come to visit. We have this row here of the highest ranking officers here. We have two of them here today visiting, but Colonel Hamilton, he is a Korean War vet. We'll be talking to him a little later probably. He was at Outpost Terry, which was one of the worst battles of the Korean War, and it's incredible what he went through. In this room over here, we'll walk in here real quick. This is the smallest room in the museum, but I think it's one of the most interesting. This is a small exhibit of World War I, and we have a lot of things in here that you wouldn't normally get to see. This case here, everything in it's over 115 years old. And I'll give you a quick glance. I don't have time to tell the whole story, but if you look at this row of pictures here, if you look close, they're all of people. The Statue of Liberty there has 25,000 troops in it. Those pictures were created by a company called Mole and Thomas out of Chicago, and they only existed in early World War I. These pictures took almost a week to create. The eagle you're looking at now from wingtip to wingtip is a half mile. It has 12,500 troops in it.
Wow.
And if you look down here at the bottom, it's black and white. Well, the white's the Army nurses, and the dark colored uniforms are the Army men. And those pictures were actually created by the company of Mole and Thomas, and they did it using hot air balloon and the old Graphics box camera. And I could tell you all the details, but we don't have time this morning. These uniforms in here are all World War I uniforms. They're 115 years old. Very interesting, and all the artifacts in this case, which you'll have to come in and see, and we'll tell you about. We've got examples of trench art. We've got the stereograph that was used to show pictures back in early World War I, and then all these artifacts people have come in and donated. This device right here is the only thing that doesn't belong in the room. This is a World War II chaplain's organ. It was folded down. It looks like a wood box with a handle on it. You carry it like a suitcase. When you got out on the battlefield on Sundays, you open that up. You open the songbook here. This is the original songbook. And you could sit down and conduct church services and have music. It's a pump organ. It still works, and I let people play it when they come up to the museum.
Wow.
So that's pretty neat. That was built in the early 1940s. Now we're coming into the biggest room in the museum. This room houses 278 mannequins, the majority of which are World War II. We have weapons that were donated from World War II. We have several artifacts that were donated from World War II. And this room is so historic because every one of these guys literally has their own story. The group over here against the wall, those men were all killed in action and they all lived very close to Pontiac here. And we honor them in a special area. And so when you come up here to really see this place, you're going to have to spend a good hour plus. Some people have spent up to 2-3 hours here, and I can keep talking all day. But it's very interesting. This display right here, you'll see nowhere else in the United States. This is Colonel Liesel Hamilton. Most people know him as Bat 21. They made a Hollywood movie about him. And he was the U.S. expert on electronic warfare and missiles. And he was 52 years old, and they put him in this aircraft up here, and they flew him up to North Vietnam. And unfortunately, during the night, the North Vietnamese had moved 2 of the missile sites. And what happened is they fired surface-to-air missiles at that aircraft. The warning lights went off, and the pilot yelled, "Eject, eject." And they all tried to eject from the aircraft. The only one that made it out alive was Colonel Hamilton. He came down to the ground, and it took 19 days for them to rescue him. And Danny Glover and Gene Hackman made the Hollywood movie that tells the whole story of that. So if you've ever heard of Bat 21, this is his actual uniform. The thing that's funny, how did he end up in the Pontiac Museum? You'd think he'd be down in Dayton at the Museum of the Air Force. That's probably where he belongs. But unfortunately, Don Fortner, who owns our airplane collection, is his relative.
Oh.
So he brought his uniform here, and this is the only place it's housed. So if you want to see the real Bat 21 and all his artifacts, they're right here, and there's his signature on the card with the parachute. But he's deceased now, but that's Colonel Hamilton's actual uniform, so that's one of the really treasures we have in here. Keep going, or are we too late?
No, we're good.
All right, right here, this is our newest display. This was created last year, but it's very unique. This is strictly of Iwo Jima. The whole display was made possible by John Sullivan, who lives right up the road here. John captured this Japanese light machine gun in World War II. His 12 Marines went up the hill and silenced the gun. It had killed several Americans. And when the process ended, there was only 3 of them left alive. And they brought this machine gun back from the war, and it sat on Sullivan's mantle up here in his house for years. And later in life, he decided that belonged in a museum, so he donated it here to the local museum. He knew us. And that's a real light machine gun. And what's neat, it's got battle damage on it. There's a hole in the tripod. That was his first shot. That hit the gunner in the leg. Second shot came off the handle of the gun and hit the gunner and killed him. And that's how they ended up silencing that machine gun nest. And the remarkable part of this was, after the machine gun was captured, he walked around to the side of the cave, and he thought he heard something in there. So he took a grenade out of his belt, pulled the pin on it, was getting ready to throw it into the cave, and he thought he heard a baby cry. And so, sure enough, a woman and a child walked out of the cave that gunner was holding prisoner. He befriended them. They now live with him right down the road up here in the States. They've been friends ever since the war. So the store's got a great story, and here's the actual story of the baby cried. It's just remarkable. You can read it. We made that book, by the way, the museum staff. Another unusual thing you'll see here, this is a jacket that actually belongs to a Japanese fighter pilot. It was captured during the war. But the thing I want to show you is hidden back here. You won't see one of these anywhere. I asked the kids what that is, and most of them don't know. That's a gyroscope. And if you look at it, it spins internally. You can see it spinning, and it spins externally. So it's going 2 directions at once. That's what kept the World War II torpedoes straight in the water. In 1943, when that was built, you got to realize that's hand machined. They didn't have electronic lathes, so it's a handmade item. Those sold for $6,500 in 1943. That's a very large amount of money. And the way it worked is real simple. They loaded the torpedo on the dive bombers. There's a line that runs from here to the skin of the torpedo, and they hit that with 3,000 psi nitrogen pressure, and it spins this thing up. Once it's spun up, it'll run for an hour.
Wow.
So isn't that remarkable? But that is actually precision machining from World War II. That's we always show everybody that. It's kind of neat. And if you come over, whoop, you guys can feel it. Feel how easy it turns. It's ridiculous. Over here, another thing a lot of people don't know about World War II is the katana swords. They were carried by the Japanese warriors. They all had two handles. I never knew this. This is the ornate handle. If you look on the bottom of it, you'll see the Japanese chrysanthemum, and they're all very intricate hand-carved handles. They're beautiful. These were worn by the Japanese soldiers marching up and down the streets of Japan in front of the emperor. When they went off to war, they pulled the pin out of that little hole, put the leather handle on. Now you got one of the most lethal fighting weapons ever devised. These were carried by all the Japanese soldiers. These you're looking at that look brand new are 400 years old.
Wow.
The one in the other case is 700 years old. And these were donated. And so that's what a real Japanese katana sword looks like. And they're absolutely razor sharp. They are just like, that's why we don't leave them out. Somebody would get hurt picking them up. Over here, this is a case of items that were brought back from Japan during the war. Very interesting. Some of the Japanese knee mortar and other things in there we'll tell you about when you come up. This is a copy of the Japanese surrender for World War II. In the next case, we didn't even have this 4 years ago, but what happened was the British visitors have been here so many times they started mailing me things.
Wow.
So now we got a British case. This is all authentic British stuff, and it's really neat. We appreciate their donations. That's a Sten machine gun. It was by a British paratrooper. We've got uniforms. We've got all these artifacts. And the thing that's kind of funny, I had a British soldier come up here in full uniform. He walked in, he was a submariner. And I mean, up to date one, like last year. And he took his dolphins off and gave to me. He said, they're prettier than the American dolphins. So we put them in here. There's an actual pair of submarine dolphins from a British submariner from current day. So that's pretty neat. You never know what we're going to get.
That's amazing.
Everything in here has stories. Up here on the wall,
Okay.
I've got another gentleman. It's Richard Koister. He served in both armies. He served in the German army. Then he got out of Germany, escaped, and came and served in the American army. So he actually fought for both sides.
Wow.
So that's a real story. He's been up here several times, and we've talked to him. So that's an interesting individual. That's
The
a
boys are interested in
bazooka.
the bazooka.
Tell them about the bazooka, Roger. Show them how it works. These are batteries in here.
This is a little larger than your normal bazooka. So this is a regular tank killer. This is made out of a lightweight material. Your World War II were smaller, but they were heavy. This is made of a lightweight material, so it's easier to carry. It fires this is your round. It fires the rocket, whereas your and all your exhaust is going to fly out the back, so you can fire this from the shoulder. Whereas the shell is going to make too much pressure and too much kick.
Thank you.
Yeah. All the items back here, this is our women of the museum, we call them. We have a line of actually World War II ladies here that all served during the war. And we like to honor them. A lot of them were nurses, but they also did other jobs. They were mechanics on airplanes and so on. So this is our tribute to the women's uniforms we put on the back wall here. Coming up on the stage now, we'll move on to a little bit more stuff. One of our newest displays, this is a tribute to Vietnam here. There's all the patches of the units from Vietnam, and we got a artillery base here that was built by our guys right here in the museum, and they did a fantastic job on that. And he'll talk more about that later. That's Dave Estes' uniform there. He was a Vietnam veteran, And his dad over here, right here, is the D-Day veteran. He actually founded the museum. There's a story goes with that. He came back after the war to Pontiac, and he put all the stuff he brought back from the war in his house, and he had it hanging in their den. Well, after about 2 years, the wife says, that's got to go. I'm not having Nazi flags hanging in my house. So he gathered all of his stuff up, went to the city and said, will you give me a room to honor veterans? And it took him quite a while to get through it. But after he did, 2004, they finally gave in and they handed him this room. Now, you notice now it's full of uniforms. When he walked in here day one, there was only 2 uniforms, one of them being his, and that table that's over there we're all sitting at. And it's grown from a veterans club now into a full-blown museum. It took us about 10 years, but now we have hundreds of uniforms. So it's remarkable. But he drove this half-track up the beach. He captured that German bunker. And then on the 50th anniversary of D-Day, he returned to Normandy carrying the flag he took down off that bunker, and he returned it to the museum that's next to that bunker.
Wow.
So that's quite a story. And that's David Estes' son that works here now. This gentleman right here, Jim Dawson, he's one I like to talk about. Jim Dawson was a crew chief of an airplane in World War II. But what's interesting is who flew it. That is actually John Glenn's airplane.
Oh.
He was his crew chief the entire war.
Wow.
So they were personal friends. He even brought John Glenn up here to meet us all at the museum. It was really neat. But they served the whole war together. And so that's quite a thing. And he's 93 years old. He's over in the nursing home. He's still here, but he's in a wheelchair. He comes up occasionally. These are all Marine uniforms, most of them from the Korean War and World War II era. When we moved down, you want me to do World War I? World War I, we also have an exhibit here of World War I. All these uniforms are 115 years old. And I think one of the most interesting things, because most people have never seen these, when I was in high school, I remember the history teacher telling us about hobnail boots. I'd never seen a pair of hobnail boots, but they're leather boots with leather soles. And there's a reason for that. They hadn't developed corrugated soles yet for shoes. So they made these hobnail boots. There's your hobnails. Most people have never seen these. These are real nails driven into the boots. They got a horseshoe on one end and toe tip thing on the other. Very heavy. I would not want to wear these and walk around all day. Feel one of those. You want to wear that? Plus, it's noisy when you get down the hall. Ooh, those things they're loud. But they did last forever. They were just about indestructible boots. And those are your World War I hobnail boots. All the uniforms, of course, are wool. They were all wool boots.
And then what if we go
Okay, we'll do one more thing here. We go around the corner, and then I got to be quiet for a while. Right here are all the aviators that flew all these various fighters and bombers up here you see from World War II. This is strictly a World War II display. You got to realize in World War II, we did not have a U.S. Air Force. It was called the Army Air Corps. They were part of the Army. And the only way you could tell the regular Army guys from the Airedales was the pants. They wore these pants called pink pants. And if they had the odd colored pants, then they were pilots or something related to aviation. If they got a shield on them, like this one, they're pilots. If they got a bomb on them like this, they're bombardier navigators. And I don't have it over here, it's in the other room, but if they got a G on them, they were glider pilots. And that's the way you could tell what a guy did. The most famous thing's probably these crusher hats that they wore so their headphones would fit over when they were flying the bombers. So that's called a crusher hat. Those were handmade, most of them out of Europe, England area, and they had those hats made, and they're quite valuable now.
Wow, there is so much history here. So many stories. I've never been in a museum, even in Europe, that has so many photographs and stories.
No, this is all stories.
Different people.
That's the way Del Estes wanted it.
Yeah.
He wanted it personal. He wanted everything not behind glass. Mm-hmm. He wanted people to be able to come in. They've never seen it like Purple Heart. They can touch it. They can see it. Mm-hmm. This is the oldest medal in the American military. Dates clear back to the Revolutionary War. That's George Washington on it, of course. But that's the medal nobody wants, because you got to be wounded by the enemy to get it or killed.
Your cousin James.
So you don't want a Purple Heart. Right here, I'll just show you this real quick. because I know Art ain't going to come up here. That's Art Leach's squadron he flew with,
And we'll be talking
Fighting
again soon.
3. They were out in Estes, Virginia, and that's where I was stationed for 11 years. I was in fighter squadrons for 11 years. But that squadron still exists today. It's just VF-31 instead of VF-3, but it's still the same squadron. Same insignias on their airplanes. We just keep going. Let's go around. We got to finish up. Go this way, guys.
And down here, we have a whole crew of veterans.
Here we
who
got
come
all
to
the
talk
veterans.
to
These are
us.
some of the best veterans that ever served. And we'll just let you go around and interview them all.
And we are going to take a very short break so I can put my phone on a tripod so we can sit and talk one-on-one. So if you will give us just a few minutes, we will be back. Thanks for joining us.